but I've been enjoying pulling together different kinds of materials for today, and I would like to also continue talking about these themes for this week, also next week when we will be meeting in person. Okay, so today's not the only day of a chance to talk about some of these things, because I know that we're recording. Great, because I know that the topics for these 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, are a bit more meaty, more substantial. So we can start the conversation today. Today, I'll show some notes. I'll show the slides, and we'll explore more next time. Okay. Also, I shared 2 chapters from this book, from my book, The Poiesis and Enchantment in Topological Media. And kind of the heart of the book having to do with what I was calling substrate, and talking about also the emergence of things, ontogenesis. We can talk about maybe also applications today, like why would maybe some people be interested in this kind of approach. And in terms of the applications, next week, I was thinking that we can look at some concrete examples from Christopher Alexander's work in architecture. So you can look at that chapter or that section that I shared for next week. Okay. All right. So let's take a look here. All right, great. So I was wondering if today we'll just basically focus on the first of the 2 chapters, chapter 4 and substrate, and we can maybe post into chat some of the terms or pages or sections that maybe you found more curious or confusing or interesting. Maybe we can collect them together. I also have my walkthrough, which I want to do with you, but maybe first we can just open the floor and see if you have any particular questions or terms you wanted to make sure we address. Okay, straight. If not, we'll keep going, So let me look up my slides here.
I just want to say that I'm looking to the side because my other computer is here with the with the chapter. That's why I'm looking there.
Great, you can go back and forth. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of a room where we have family coming in, so sorry about that. Hi, Ron. Hi, welcome back. Let's see where we can begin. How about this? Let me just share screen right away, and that way we can take a look and share screen and make sure you can see the sound too. And I will share Keynote. Yes, here we go. Do you see a bunch of slides? Yes? Okay, great. Yes. All right. So I'm thinking of first, 2 parts. One part is basically one way to get into this was that I talked about, maybe mentioned I think before, was thinking about some notions, for example, from feminist theory about like intersectionality. I think maybe at least one of you mentioned this somewhere about intersectionality, and that in turn came from, and also how that responds to some earlier work in, at least in North America and Europe, especially in America, to what people now call identity politics. Okay, and thinking about, of course, it's become really even more hot in the sense because of the kind of polarizations that we see in the United States today, right? But of course, not only here, it's actually in many different parts of the world, unfortunately, which is the kind of politics that we get if we start with a question of, what ethnic group or what cultural group or religious group or what orientation we are in first, okay? If we want to define our relationships with one another in terms of identity. So that's common. It's not uncommon, it's common. So, like in university, like at ASU and like many universities in America, there's this notion of justice. What is it? JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, right? JEDI. And it's on everybody's mind. In fact, I'm on committees and faculty committees where we're supposed to actually evaluate even prospective faculty on not only research and teaching potential, but also on what are they doing in order to, I don't know what you would say, in order to rectify maybe structural racism, let's say, okay, things like that. But, I guess it'd be I don't know, we can talk a little bit first about that. I mean, if you think about, whether this should be something that an institution should deal with, or not. We'll talk about that. Just we'll come back to that. Okay. And the second half is taking a step back from that kind of issue, right? Taking a step back and thinking about maybe really fundamental, or the question is, are there maybe fundamental ways to get at some of those really hard questions, really complicated questions? When we have different people who come from or represent or advocate different social groups and different social interests, and there's a conflict. So we can look at it in the sense like post facto, how do we resolve conflicts? How do we settle disagreements on what is to be done? Or can maybe come from a different, from prior point of view or primordial point of view, says, okay, well, where do these conflicts come from? Or where do differences come from? How do differences emerge? And then think about, is there a way to work with differences, and rather than to eliminate differences, because one way to go is, hey, let's just find a common language and we'll be all okay, or find a common frame of reference. So here are all the universal rights of man, and we all agree to that, so we're okay. Then we'll be okay. Just a matter of coming to some sort of agreement, and that turns out to be really, as we know, historically, it's been really not easy. Or if we do come up with such a thing, then there's a gap between those declarations and what is actually done, right? Which means there's something going on here. So I'm proposing in the second part to talk about this more kind of primordial dynamics by which different kinds of intensities of likes and dislikes come. And now use the word care in that part. Okay, we'll talk about what care could mean in a more primordial sense. Okay, but to avoid a loop, if you just say we only talk about care in terms of caring for people like myself, like ourselves, that's kind of like the easy case, right? Care for family, that's an easy case. So we have to see. Okay, so that's kind of the 2-minute introduction to the kind of the hour I want to spend with you guys. Okay, so let's start off first about just talking about maybe this question of difference. So, whoops, I guess I'm all alone now. Okay, it's great. So maybe, I guess, people are all familiar with the JEDI issues, and also especially in light of the really harsh events from the past couple of summers, and 2 summers ago with Black Lives Movement, with Black Lives Matter movement, etc., and Me Too, etc. So I wonder what your opinions are. What do you think? Hey, welcome, Nikki.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
Welcome. No, it's fine. I mean, coming a good time. Just to recap, what I'm talking about is a 2-part hour today with everyone. And the first part will be thinking about just to motivate the chapter, which is chapter 4 on substrate. I wanted to first take a little bit of time and ask everyone, how we can think about this phenomenon of social groups, or and conflicts based on different kinds of identities. Okay, so do people have some opinions on how we should think about this, or how to approach this question of what is to be done resolving issues or politics or just even civil relationships based on identity? At least in institutions that we're in, like the university, like ASU,
I kind of have a confession to make. I missed the attachments that you sent. I kept reading the email. I was like, I'm very sure I have more to read. So I only read the readings on process. And so when you sent the first email today, I was like, snap, all I just needed to do was scroll down. So I haven't read it. So just a disclaimer. Yeah, I totally
it's okay. I'm going to review through the slides some key steps in the chapter 4 on substrate. So that's okay.
I will read it though, but I somehow I missed it. I don't know.
It's okay. Yeah. I mean, even if you read it once, it's still okay, because I think, we're going to try to ease into these discussions. And so thank you for sharing that. It's okay. And I want to motivate that. So maybe first thing I'm thinking about is basically how at least institutions that we're in, if you have experiences from other social or national contexts, that's also extremely illuminating, because it probably be quite different than how these questions of identity politics are constructed here in the United States. But just thinking about like these questions of identity, I wonder how people construct. I mean, even yourselves, if you talk to, we're coming from different cultural and national origins. So I'm just thinking we should start out first about maybe some personal reflections on how each of us deal with these questions of identity and differences in identity.
I mean, I think I can say something about that without reading the books. I think for me, okay, I'm Nigerian, but I think coming to America, I don't know if this is the case, I doubt this is the case all over the country, but like coming to ASU, I have never noticed Blackness, like, of my skin. Yeah, because like in Nigeria, how we categorize ourselves, like if you drill it down, apart from like being Nigerian, like on the national level, is that we categorize ourselves based on tribes. Funny fact is that I heard that here in America, saying tribes can be offensive. And it's like, that's how we classify ourselves. Like in Nigeria, everybody's from a tribe. There's no such thing as a tribal per se. But then coming here, I just realized that, okay, so like there are not many people who look like me, skin-wise. I have a very funny story about how I went to like a Western town here in Arizona, and a Caucasian woman looked at me and was like, oh, like, I like your skin tone. Like, it's like a really like strong tan. I like your tan. And I was like, me? It's like, is this natural, or like, is this like a really good tan? And I was like,
how did you do it? What's your technique?
I'm just like, I mean, like, I consumed an unhealthy diet of Hollywood, like from like when I was a little child. So I know that when someone says a tan, like if you over tan yourself, you end up looking either red, like really red, or like orange. Like, so I was like, how do you go from red, orange to like black? Like, how do you even conceive that this is the product of a tan? And then I was like, no, like, I was born this way. She was like, oh yeah, because like, you know, I was just like, it's like a really good time. I was like, I had to say I'm Black, and Black is not how I categorize myself. If you ask me, I'm not going to tell you that I'm Black. I'll tell you that I'm Nigerian. Like, I specifically like to say that I'm Nigerian because there is this lazy thing that happens in the West where, God help you if you are Black and you're not like maybe like African American or something, they just throw the African on you. It's like somebody tells you, I'm going to visit Africa. And I'm just like, where are you going to? Because we are so not the same. Like Nigeria alone has like 250 tribes, 500 languages. Tribalism is a problem in Nigeria because you have like major tribes and you have like minority tribes. So like, what do you mean like you're going to Africa? Like even if you're coming to Nigeria, you will have like a totally different experience if you're going to northern Nigeria, southern Nigeria, eastern or western Nigeria. So like, you know, I know that for a lot of people are not trying to be malicious. Like it's just, it's a reflex action. Like they're not trying to be evil or wicked or anything. It's like, for me, I think that I can relate that to how I would see people look a certain way and just call them Chinese, and they literally can be from like Thailand. But in my head, I'm just like, oh, everybody that looks like this face is from China, you know? But for me, like coming here, I've been able to like meet like people from other parts of Asia to know that, oh yeah, so this person is from Taiwan, like this person is from China, this person is from different places. And even in Nigeria, I would say that I like Asian food, but then being here, like I tried Japanese food and I'm like, God bless the Japanese, that's not my vibe. So when now I know to say that, oh, I like Chinese and Korean food. I can vouch for those two. Don't take me to a Japanese restaurant. Like I will go, I will eat, but like I will actually like the food, but my preference is for like actual Chinese and Korean food. Even I'm learning to make those distinctions. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not just a one-way thing as per how people from Africa are viewed or something. It's just unconscious based on how we're socialized, right? Do I think that there are some people who are just nasty? Yes. Like I in some way, yes. I think that the woman who was asking me about the tan was actually being in some ways nasty, was beyond ignorance, because there's no frame of reference. Like even if you go to a remote village in Nigeria, nobody's going to ask the white man, oh, did you scrub your skin so much it became white? It's just like there's no. And there was literally no reason for her to ask me that question. I was just in her store. Like I wanted to buy something. Like, how did we get there? Right. So back to me saying, like, for me, I do categorize myself as Black because I wasn't raised as Black. I was raised as like Yoruba, as Nigerian, as my mother's daughter. Like there's a huge emphasis on growing up not disgracing your family. I don't know if some other cultures here have it, but there's like, whatever you do not bring shame to our name. Like I'm here and I'm just like, I'm 27, but then I'm thinking, what does my mother think about this? Am I bringing shame to my mother? Like there's a huge emphasis on family. So my mother doesn't wake up and tell me, oh, you know, you are Black. She tells me, remember whose child you are. There's an actual Yoruba saying, which is a tribe to say, Ronti Omo Eni Toje, remember whose child you are. So if I don't categorize myself as Black, normally it won't be out of spite. It's just like, that's not like, you don't go to Nigeria and say, hello, hi, I'm a Black woman. It's like, all of us are Black. You haven't said anything. Like, you know, so yeah, so it just makes me think about how in one place you are one thing, right? In Nigeria, Yoruba, right? But in America, I am Black. Like your identity can change depending on where you are, right? So, and that's one thing I've noticed, like coming to America, and then how like we all have like preconceived notions, like there's preconceived notions of like what China is, you know, there's like America, China, and then you're like, oh my God, you're from China? How did you, like,
Right.
So
yeah. Sure. Very interesting. Very interesting. Let's hear more. Let's hear more from everyone. Yeah. Like this question of your identity or the categories under which you're classified can depend on where you land. And that's quite interesting. That's really quite interesting. And they may be very different from the categories that you apply to yourself back home. That's already an interesting question right there. My mother came, of course, I'm from, different generation. And my mother came when she was, 18, 17, middle 20th century. All right. She's passed away now. She was very, by contemporary standards of American women or European women or women from Nicaragua or whatever, she was pretty naive. In terms of not knowing, what cultures were like other places, because, first of all, jet travel isn't what it is like it is now today. And so she was very naive, but also her hosts were also interestingly naive. So she was very lucky. She got taken in by some wealthy American families. She was a student. It was during the Civil War. And thank you. And they were kind to her, but they just asked her these amazing questions that she thought were hilarious. So I think I told you the story. They asked her, like, in China, do you eat chicken? You know what chicken? Do you eat chicken? And she said, well, I don't know. We have eggs. And then they also asked her something more serious. They asked her to see her feet at some point early on. And she was just completely surprised. So why do you want to see my feet? Anybody want to guess why they wanted to see her feet? Yeah, Celia knows. Other people? The non-Chinese in the room?
I'm not sure if it's Chinese or Japanese culture, but about like geishas and then like sticking their feet into like really small shoes as like a beauty standard or something to make it small.
Yeah, that was foot binding. It was called, and that was already, even in my mother's generation. First of all, that was dynastic imperial China. First of all, and restricted to very, very few people, to very few women, specifically certain concubines. Right, in China, it was already archaic and considered not modern. And so my mother was shocked, because that was kind of one of the few things that these people had heard about. So they were curious to see, what it's this kind of common practice, kind of expected that every Chinese woman would be like that. And every, even though it was already kind of like 50 years after the change of the republic, to Republic of China, things like that. But then my mother was also naive because they offered her different kinds of American food. They wanted to introduce her to different kinds of food, and she said, first of all, the food was tasteless. To her, it was tasteless. It was not. This is back in basically when salt and pepper were the only spices, and pepper was pretty exotic for American cuisine. And I'm not kidding. So then they offered her hot dogs, and you can imagine how horrified my mother was to be offered the meat of dogs for food. And this is interesting too, because then conversely, there is this idea that in China people eat every kind of animal, right? Maybe, but this is a whole continent. So if you put the continent together, you have this kind of union of different kinds of practices. These are just anecdotes, but my question is maybe more like, what do people do with these differences? What can you do with these differences if you come across them? Or what can we do? What can people do?
I have something to share about like differences. So for example, in the institute level, if you're in an international school, so if you grew up with people from different countries, definitely those differences will influence how the school construct a class environment or school environment for students to be more engaged, to know each other. Because I went to international school when I was younger, and I had a chance to meet people from different countries. And I think, for example, like some of my Korean friends from like early age, there's one thing I still remember really good, because I think when we were like around second, third grade, like kids are just not following rules. And there's two Korean boys in my class. They were like doing something with damaged facilities, and then the teacher was saying something to them, be like, you should be ashamed because you represent Korea to us because you're in a foreign school. And then immediately two guys, they are like, they're decent tall, and then they start whipping. And then I think when I was in the early age, I saw that, and immediately in my mind, I feel like, oh, Koreans, they are really unified with each other. They feel like those national identity. They feel like they're in a foreign country, and because I think the teacher was telling them why you shouldn't do this, that doesn't touch their heart. But when the teacher was saying that, this is putting your country in a shame, and people would think that all the Koreans in Korea are like this, behave like this, and then they immediately feel really bad. And like those things in their early education, I believe, or from their parents that were immigrant to China, and their parents are telling them that this is important. That's why when the teacher is mentioning this to them, they feel really strong, and they feel those impact. And I think that also teaches us a lesson when at least for me, like I feel I always have the respect, and I always feel like, oh, my Korean friends, they're really unified with each other. And I think that is true when I came to America in later the year, and most of the Korean friends that I met, they tend to team up with each other. They help each other in their community compared to like people from other nationality. Despite the fact that you should participate more with the social events in America, they kind of like stay with each other. Yeah, depends on how people are comfortable with the community. But I think for me, like the environment is really important, like the education. I think also from early age, especially for like Chinese people, if you grew up learning and writing Chinese, this is like a trick that people were saying that if you were raised in Chinese language, there's no way for you to lose identity. Just like if people are born in America without learning Chinese, even though they are born Chinese, but they are not considered Chinese because you're not utilize the same language, and you don't understand how the logic and how stuff is working, like those little hidden rules that Chinese people are dealing with each other. It's really difficult to understand. Like we often like teasing Like my siblings, they both grew up in Canada, and their parents are both from China, and one is from Beijing. And they're always saying that like I can't do nothing about my kids. Like I talk to them in Chinese, they respond in English. And even like for us, like siblings going to their house, you never feel those connection as if those relatives are in China, because we are losing those bridge. They don't write in Chinese, they barely talk, and most important, like they don't really care. I think a lot of people, for identity, it also depends on how much effort you put in, because I think for me my experience with mixed national group, I always have the open mind that I'm willing to accept that there are different people around the world, and I'm not surprised to see people from different country. But I think in a lot of places, even in America, that I thought that America is like a really developed country, but when I first landed here, I still experienced things such as because they still seeing like really old martial art like films. They would be like, "Oh, can you actually fly?" I was like, "Which century are you living in?" Like that's doing like through the wires and the I just don't know, like at that level of education, like sometimes also got me thinking like, what is this group of America living in? Like what kind of society that they are? It just feels like they never travel, because even within China, not saying that people from China are like more developed, but it's just we have certain part of Chinese people that has the opportunity to expose to multicultural experience, or at least I think we're more encouraged. Where I'm from is like coastal city, so we are more open to do like business. So I think also because of that, like the cultural and the society influence, that we are more exposed to different cultures, and we're aware that there's a lot of things going on in other countries, and even from the news that we are more eager to know, wow, there's things happen there, even though that's nothing to do with our daily life, but it's like part of the culture. But whereas I think in
Oh, no, finish, please. Go ahead, finish your
no, I
thought.
was just saying that whereas in America, that when I was like in my early 18, I just thought that, well, that must be the most developed country ever in the city, in the universe. But when I first landed, I was like, wow, they don't even have like subways like where we have. Like, was the first city I went was Michigan, and then I was like, wow, I've never seen like countryside like this in my whole life. Yeah.
So let me ask a couple of questions. I mean, one is, it's interesting. I mean, I was born in the States, right? And my parents taught, my mother, I think I told you already, made a really big effort on teaching me and my siblings Chinese, and we all spoke Chinese at home, which is very unusual for American-born Chinese. It's more like what you're Celia saying. I mean, probably even maybe Chinese-born Chinese who came to America very, very young, probably also mostly, tended to speak in the dominant ambient language, English, let's say. But my question is, what is it? What is it that would make people, let's say, children of immigrants or people who have immigrated, stay to their own language, or instead try to assimilate by using the host country's language, even at home? So what is it? Why do some people retain and what other people don't? What makes it? What's going on here?
I think the main concern for a lot of elder generation from China, the purpose of using the language is to have the root. Like it's important in China because like how we construct our name is always the family name in the beginning, and then your given name afterwards. So we weighted family as a group, as a social constructor. So family is the root. And also you have to know where the first one in the family. So usually in that tribe, you will have like the big names. Like for me, for example, like my last name is Yang, and then we'll go back to trace whatever our ancient parents are. And like I think from early age, we keep hearing stories about like how this is happening, and we know like somewhere else there's like old family, ancient family, and they're part of us. So you should try your best to make your family proud instead of like make them feel really ashamed. So I think those kind of things are stick with us when we are at an early age. even like just common communication in China. That's why I think students here or Chinese kids in the state, they don't have those environments, because even though they are speaking Chinese, but it depends on how the family is available in communication. So if family is only available when they are after work, the communication style will be related to like family stuff, less about social content or the education stuff, because parents won't have much time available for providing extra education material. Whereas if you are in a Chinese environment, it's easy to hear a lot of things from neighborhoods. So when I grew up, like maybe my neighbor, like aunties and uncle would be saying stuff like, oh, this and that, and then you will pick up, even though it doesn't make sense. It's just like when they make us to remember like poems and paragraphs when we are really young, it doesn't really make sense. But then one day you will be like, oh, I have heard this somewhere else. But for a lot of people that grew up in a different country, they might not be able to have those information at their earlier age.
Another question is, there's a book, Luz has a comment. You want to say? Luz, go ahead.
Oh, yes, I was just saying that I agree with the fact that language could be considered a heritage family aspect. It is important if the family considers language an essential aspect of life, then the younger generations will adapt it. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I didn't want to leave the comment.
Yeah, this is we can also read Luz's comments aloud for you.
Yeah. Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I feel like America in many ways has like a huge influence on the world. So I feel like even people who are not American are aspiring towards the American dream, like consciously or some version of the American dream. And so like in a country like Nigeria, we're colonized by the British, and then the fact that we have so many languages in Nigeria, our official language is English. So like most people speak English, right? So, but then there's also the way English has now become associated with an elevated class. So the more you can speak English, the higher your like societal or economic class. So it then begins unconsciously, there's this idea that the Western way is better, that just, subsumes you. And so we're wearing Western clothes, we're listening to Western music, we are watching Hollywood movies. So it just seeps into like your everyday life. And now, am I saying that we shouldn't like adopt like, everybody should sit in their bubble and be like, our grandfathers were doing this way 2,000 years ago? No, like I do think that there's such a thing as embracing cultures that are not necessarily ours, because it's like progress. It's like, oh, because my Nigerian ancestors didn't invent the refrigerator, then I wouldn't use it. Well, I will use the refrigerator. But like, since there's that, thing of seeing like English as a mark of economic and like societal class, you even have people going as far as like in Nigeria, sending their kids to school to learn how to speak in a certain accent. So some people will only send their children to schools where they learn how to speak with like either an American accent, if maybe eventually they want their children to go to the US, or like in a British accent. And it is even such a thing that there are a number of jobs that you go for, like interview for in Nigeria, and your accent will get you the job. Like you sound British, like in the media space, the less Nigerian you sound, the better for you, right? Like you probably get paid more than people who sound like regular Nigerians. And so even the names, right? So my first name is Bemideke, my surname is Anthony. Like there's no how you want to trace, like my father's name is not Anthony, but we adopted that name as Anthony. And I can't speak my language. So my parents are from two different tribes, but like growing up, we spoke English. Like my mother would take me to the library and be like, read this book, Gulliver's Travels, summarize it, tell me what you learned. And I would write and like, no, you didn't write this English well. And that was literally what I was raised on, a healthy diet of like reading Western books, CNN, Cartoon Network, right? So language, our language was not important to us, but English language was, right? So I didn't have like contact with like one of my parents' language until like maybe I was like maybe 8 or 9, where I stayed with neighbors who refused to speak English to me. And that is how like I came to understand like my mother's language. I still don't understand my father's language because like he never, taught it to us. And people will go as far as saying stuff like, what do you gain by learning your language? Like it does nothing for you. Like you can't speak your language in the office. Like you have to speak English. So what's the point? But again, as growing up, it's just making me see how like a number of Nigerian languages have gone extinct. But then culture and language are, is something that we should be proud of. Like you don't have to, because you want to maybe thrive at work or something, then kill an entire part of you to say, I'm going to deny the fact that I'm Yoruba or something. And then because I want to be, make it go far, at work. So I think that as a child, I didn't have a problem with not speaking my language. It was a thing of pride to say, I speak better English than all of you here. Like my siblings and I were like, that was like our brag, like we're better than all of you, right? But now I feel so sad because I'm like, why can't I speak my language? And I'm married, and I've told like my husband, I was like, I want to give our children the most difficult names. Like, if you can't pronounce it, then yes, like fine, because it is not my duty to sit down and simplify a name or something for you. Like it's bad enough, like we already speak English as like a national language. You are getting 3 Yoruba names. Like the more complex the names, the better, because yes, we should be proud of your culture. So it's like just a mix of like colonialism, the American dream, classism, many different reasons why, especially if you're in a new place, you are a migrant, you want to fit in because you already are different. Like they can give you the passports, but they know that like this is not your origin. So you have to do a lot of work to make sure that, just, assimilate into the system.
Let me propose something here, that we're already seeing how maybe there's a much richer way to think about positioning, let's say, ourselves socially, not so much in terms of categories, because we have all these issues already. Whose categories are they? Where did it come from? We may have categories at home, but they're different from categories that we encounter where we land, et cetera, et cetera. But then we're hearing this discussion about language. So, but I want to go back to some references. Okay, first of all, a comment from, I think you're from Syria, I can't remember now, made me think about this issue where maybe we carry these frames of reference with us wherever we go. Meaning, for example, I mean, like when I was married to an Italian, I was very kind of, I'm American born. I would go to somewhere, I would go to an Italian city, and I would see these Americans, because I was kind of like putting myself different from them, coming in to speak in English and ask for Coca-Cola or ask for a hamburger, even though they're in the middle of a little Italian town where you can actually have amazing food, but they would look for the American foods they were familiar with, which I'm sympathetic to, because I know, when traveled to somewhere far away, it's comfort to be able to eat something familiar, right? So there's this issue. But also maybe American military bases in Europe have had and still do have their stores, which are the same stores you would find in the shopping mall in the middle of wherever, Indiana, California, Michigan. So that was kind of the running joke. American military bases don't just carry soldiers and tanks and guns; they also carry, the familiar architectures of suburbia with them. So there's this thing. But more subtly, there's these issues of all sorts of categories we use to order what we perceive of the world. And I'm wondering if it's even possible to escape that. Maybe we always carry these bubbles with us. So, even if I'm backpacking to the middle of the Andes, right? And, I go around, I have maybe I try to be, quote, as close to the native as possible, but still maybe there's this membrane here, right? It's always going to be filtering. So I carry that with me. There's a very interesting book, a very powerful book by Edward Said. I put it into chat, which is an extraordinary book. And I think in a sense, we don't need to read it as much if we already come from different cultural backgrounds, we go somewhere else. But Edward Said is one of the most influential and respected literary scholars. I think he was at Columbia. Anyway, he's Palestinian, I believe, from origin. Became a giant of literary theory. And he wrote this book called Orientalism about how the Europeans constructed kind of fantasies about the mysterious and the feminine Asian culture, the whole culture, right? So then, but it goes into great detail about the mechanisms of how Europeans constructed these kinds of images. And in fact, even how some of those images were, or these kind of fantasies were even adopted and co-opted when useful by the subject culture. So it's very interesting. It's a very deep book, actually, a very powerful book. And it's still, I think, very, very useful. Another much more recent book is by, much more recent. It's by Tony Hart and Negri, where it's called Empire. It's interesting because it doesn't just neatly draw the geopolitical lines. There's kind of the, let's say Mexico, Central America, South America, and they had these geopolitical regions, and they all bounded. So you have the notion of global North and global South, right? And you have the extraction of capital and of knowledge and resources from global South to global North, which certainly occurs, okay? Certainly occurs, but they complexify that picture by thinking about, for example, different kinds of ways of thinking that one finds dotted around the globe. So there can be people who are considering themselves kind of the technology elites, right? The people who can code in Python and Java in the middle of Kyiv, Ukraine, or in Nigeria, or in California. Okay, there's this network of, let's say, ways of thinking and people who do it that span the globe. All right, or others who are, billionaires who own yachts, and you have them in China, you have them in probably have a couple, a few, not too many, but a couple in Africa and a couple in Germany too. So there's kind of these kinds of, and it's not just the people, it's also the ways of thinking. So those kinds of identities really perfuse the entire planet, and this is an effect of of late 20th century capitalism, one could say, or migration, or colonialism, however you want to put it. So Empire is a very interesting book for that reason, I think, to try to complexify this picture beyond just kind of neat boundaries that can draw around the geopolitical regions. So we had to leave, because we don't have time, we won't be able to go more into these directions, but I wanted just to point out that these are kind of, there are vast amounts of studies and literature talking about identity and how to deal with differences in identity, okay, all the way down to the present time. Now, I'm going to turn the corner and then give a break, okay? But let me turn the corner first by showing you a few slides, okay? I'll set this up for us. And I'm sorry if we didn't have time for everybody to comment, but I'm going to share slides right away. Here, with Keynote. Okay, here's where we are. So I wanted to think about, can we still see this? Yeah, good, right. Oh, wait a minute, this is the wrong one. Let me go back. Here we are. Because we can stratify, we can differentiate between among people by all sorts of categories, right? First human, non-human, animal, plant, and also at different scales, so to speak, right? We've been talking about kind of a how do you say, an individual person-based scale, one person at a time, right? But also we talked about tribe and family as being this other kinds of units of analysis. Or we can talk about body parts like livers or organs, right? And think about, also even think about microbiomes. We can think about like in terms of COVID, right? This just interesting and sometimes weird debate about, where did the COVID virus come from? Is it from China? From the point of view of the COVID virus, it probably has no idea of a nation state, right? Or probably it may even have from the point of view of a code. Oh, okay, can you see? Sorry, I think you can't see this. Let's try again. Share screen. Here, now can you see this card? I did, okay. So from the point of view of a virus, we can question whether the virus has any idea about a nation state. Probably not, right? But even from a point of view of a virus, what do you think? Do you think a virus can even have an understanding of distinguish between chicken, chimpanzee and human being? What do you think?
I think it would be hard to know, like, what's the point of view of the virus. Like, we don't have any sort of evidence. If a virus, well, I don't know if there's, well, maybe they can, because distinguish between a human being and a dog, for example, because they can get hosted on a human being, but not on a dog. That's a way of that the virus might make the difference between different beings, but definitely it didn't make a difference about culture or national origins. So it was hosted by inhuman beings.
Yes, absolutely. So here we go. If we look at how viruses work from scientific point of view, let's say, I mean, look at how it has certain kinds of on the surface of the virus. We're told this, right? That they had different kinds of chemical and morphological bindings to sites on the host cell. Okay, so if we take the view of if we take into account of, let's say, molecular chemistry, molecular physiologies at the molecular level, right? The virus, or any virus really, what is it? How does it engage with its material complement, the world, is through the different kinds of bindings at the level of molecular interactions, right? And sometimes shapes too. Okay, now thinking of it that way, the virus, the COVID virus, let's say, it doesn't really need to, it doesn't operate on the basis of whether the cell surfaces it's going to infect is belonging to some species, a chimpanzee, a bird, or human. The notion of species is invented by us, by human scientists, after all, actually, right? So that's in fact why some viruses, quote, jump from species to species, like the bird flu, right? The avian flu, or in the case of a COVID virus, maybe jump from an animal, or species to us. But from the point of view of the viruses themselves, they don't have a notion of species. They're just doing their thing. That makes sense? Mechanically, chemically, physiologically. Now, there's an ecological thinker, I'll provide a reference later on, named von Huxgall, late 19th century, early 20th, who's very, very influential in changing our perspective away from the anthropocentric way of thinking about what animals know or don't know, what any creature can see. Because he pointed out that a lot of times when we describe what animals are, how animals distinguish the world, we're putting ourselves into that position and using our human senses and our social categories to describe what the animal sees. So anyway, leave it at that. Now, any of these distinctions are still going to give us different points of view. So the basic question, I would say, is thinking about the self. Let's go back to the human. Is this question of what is the self and what is the world, the complement to the self? Okay, and I'll take us through a few frames after the break. Okay, but this is kind of the beginning, let's say, of one way to do a social theory. Start with the self, and then And then you have this notion of self and others and how to relate. But it will be very quick. I'll do a quick potted history of that kind of potted argument for that kind of thing. And then look for something different. Okay, different way of thinking about relating. Okay, great warm-up discussion. It's heated. Let's take maybe 5-7 minutes and I'll keep my video going and see you in a little bit. Okay.
All right.
Okay, here we are. So the question is, what's the primordial from which solidarity comes from? Okay, or different kinds of solidarity come from. So that's going to be the approach now I take with you. So let's go share screen. Here we are. I just took this out from the chapter in the book. So it's kind of stated baldly right now, so it's very abstract. I'm going to work through them tonight with you. And the key thing is number 4 here, I would say. That I'm going to propose that instead of thinking about, before we're thinking about solidarity, maybe we think about care. Okay, and what could be meant by care. And before we think about any particular emotion that's directed, like I love you or I hate that, which is very directed. There's an object of regard and there's a subject saying the subject loves that object, okay? So instead of thinking in those kinds of explicit relationships, maybe you could think about the field from which those relationships come, okay? I'm gonna say more so we can understand what we mean by that, by field, okay? So, so one way that some people have been thinking about this is to use the word affect. So you're going to hear a lot about affect theory. And I want to try to give something a bit more concrete, which is still resonant with the notion of affect, using the word care, with the notion of care. Okay. Because it could be like care, could be something like you say a person is caring, like a doctor or a nurse is caring, or a teacher is caring, which is not the same thing as saying the teacher cares about a specific student. It's a general quality, or a person is a good listener. A person is somebody you can rely upon, but it's not the same thing as saying that person has a specific relationship. Okay, so that's what I mean by attunement. Or has a sensitivity to, pathic sensitivity to a situation. Okay, so that's number 4. So I want to build up to that. All right. So what are the conditions for that to be the case? What enables care, right? So that's what these different steps are. Building up layer by layer the conditions of possibility, That kind of a way to say it precisely. The condition of possibility for care, right? Before that. So the steps are, first, that we need some sort of medium or stuff or substrate within which some sort of connection can happen. Any kind of connection can happen at all. That's the first step. Okay. These are speculative propositions. Okay. Number two, in this kind of stuff, plenum means full stuff, not empty, not void. In this kind of plenum, another word for it can be coming from physics is field, but a field usually is immaterial, right? So that's why I want to go back and forth between plenum and field. But in any case, what the notion of field gives us is the possibility of change. And change, in this case, I'm going to show you pictures and animations in a minute, okay? Gives us a sense of a change everywhere all at once, like that movie, which is that just got the Oscars, right? So that this kind of change is not about a specific object. Hey, do you see me in the camera? Do you see me holding up a coin here? Okay, good. I don't see myself. So one kind of change is take this coin and move it from one location to another location. But another kind of change, which is more field-like change, is this whole air, the air in this room and the air in the city that I'm sitting in changes temperature all the time, everywhere. So that's the kind of change I'm talking about, the field-like change, okay? That's number two. That fields gives us a way to think about dynamics across entire stuff in the world. And there can be many kinds of fields. Number three is, and this is a shift of level of talk, is that a certain kind of set of fields, which we'll call affective fields, fields of, you might call primordial to feeling, okay? Let's say attractions and repulsions, tendencies to feel some way or another way, which are distributed throughout the world, okay? Not at a particular locus, but throughout the world. Think of gravity, right? Can be a way to constitute value. Value could be, and then we need to discuss everything. You know, what does value mean? You know, what could value mean? That's worth something, right? It's worth doing, let's say, worth living. And then we got to number four, which is once we have a notion of affective field, or which is changing, bubbling and changing all the time, different intensities here and there, we can maybe, in that context, we can think about care as an affective field, okay? And finally, related to all this is how important it is that we can have continuous variations of intensity of care or any kind of affective field during, like, think of temperature, all right? Think of temperature. Think of heat, okay, as your model, it's as an intuition. All right. Now let's go into more, you know, one by one. All right. So here's the first picture in terms of plenum. Okay. Did I show this picture before? It's one of my favorite paintings by Matisse called La Danse, and probably you've seen it or some version of it. It's a very famous painting by Matisse, Henri Matisse, and clearly, you know, these dancers are collectively engaged in the joy of dancing together. You can ask, besides the obvious one of touching each other, holding their hands, okay, what would you say are the media in which this event of dancing together is happening? Very simple, not a trick question, but what would be some of the media in which they're immersed?
They are immersed in a blue and green background.
That's the painting. I'm more thinking about the event, what he's trying to depict.
Okay, it would be like the sky and some sort of lawn, perhaps.
The air, the air, and
I think like this shows synergy and like how like there's rhythm, there's like harmony in the interconnectedness of what they are doing, which is like dancing.
Mhm. Energy, tension, rhythm, temporal dynamics, that's all there. You've seen this before. Plus, what's not represented, but probably would be there, speaking of rhythm, music, sound of some sort, if only the sound of feet, breathing, but there's sound. And of course, smell, the smell of the body, the smell of the air, humidity, moisture, heat itself, right? So there are all sorts of media, of course. And what's interesting, right, about heat and sound is that they permeate the bodies. They perfuse the bodies, right? The air has temperature, the air has sound passing through it. The earth is vibrating with the sound of the sound as well. The sound goes through the bodies. So sound for me is always beautiful as a medium because it permeates all objects. That's why it's so hard to soundproof a room, because that's by very nature. Now, technology. It took me a while to do some crude photoshopping. But imagine mediating with iPhones. Okay. So this is what we get. We evacuate the world. We evacuate all that thick stuff, the thickness of the air, the thick vibrations through matter, the smell, heat, that's all gone, right? That's not in this technology at all. It's highly abstracted to points with IP addresses, Wi-Fi, right? If it's Wi-Fi, or cell addresses, and particular channels, which are, again, formal. They're formal identifiers, okay? And you can imagine. And then we try to make up, a collective living, valuable event out of it. What's lost, right? Now, so that's why the first hypothesis or proposition is that a connected stuff, plenum, is a condition, is a necessary condition, not sufficient, but at least necessary. Okay. And the one word I want to, plenum, you can use your intuitions about, like water is the plenum, air is the plenum, heat is the plenum. But then think about friendship, right? You say, well, I'm friends with, you would name your friends, okay? But can you imagine, I think who was talking about this? Oh yeah, Luce, you were talking about kids playing in the street and feeling that it's okay for them to be in the street. And it may be that I don't know may not know all the people who are living along the alley yet. And I already feel that it's safe for my kids to play there. So I don't necessarily yet have a named relationship with everyone on that street, and yet have this feeling that the street is a commons that's safe for my kids to play in. So there's that idea of, so you see what I'm saying is that the sociality of the street may not be necessarily only a function of specific identified social relationships between named actors, which is what a computer model would require if you have an ontology. Okay. Plenum, it's in red because that's, I'm sorry, connected is in red because that's one notion I wanted to just draw attention to tonight. And I think we won't have time to talk about it more, but you can think about what connected means. And this I'll talk about another time, but there's a way to think about connectedness, okay? Down here, the bottom here. Usually we think without using lines, right? Usually in the graph picture, you have nodes and arcs, right? You say two nodes are connected. So you say connected by a wire, by a line. But I'm going to make this a forward reference, is that there are ways to think about connectedness without using this kind of figure of a line connecting 2 points. Okay, because you think about it. Well, can you give an example from real life, from physical life, like Alaska is not connected to the rest of the continental United States, but Rhode Island is connected to California. I could say that, right? And people kind of say, "Oh, I guess I know what you mean." But then I don't have to tell you what highways you drive to get from California to Rhode Island to say that they're connected in this continental sense of connectedness. Another example, the Atlantic Ocean. We can say the Atlantic Ocean is connected. Now we get into deeper waters. Haha. Okay. So what does it mean to say that the ocean is connected? That begins to put it more into the domain of topology. Okay. This is just a format. Okay, I'll move on from here. Okay. Second point. In this particular proposition, that the field is gives us a way to understand what we might mean by multiplicity, by potential dynamics. I think I have a picture here. Here's the difference between a kind of object-based way of thinking about a situation and the next slide, which is going to be a field-based way of thinking about the same situation. Okay, just from physics. And you all have seen this, right? Talking about gravity, right? There's the sun here, and there's a planet or satellite moving around the sun. And one way to do the physics is you look at the distance between, I'll freeze it here. Let it go out to here, and then I freeze it. Okay. So it's near the R, the little planet, and here's the sun, the brightly colored thing on the right-hand side. And one way to do the physics is to calculate the distance between the planet and the sun, right? That's R, right? And you have the mass of the sun and the mass of the planet. You can calculate according to Newton's gravity, laws of gravity, the force of gravity between the sun and the planet. Okay, this is the object-based way of understanding physics. Object sun, object earth, and then object planet, and then you integrate the equations, and you get this motion. Okay, so this is the object way of thinking about how planets move around the sun. Here's another picture. This way. Now, in this picture, there's no planet yet, okay? Just the sun. And given the mass of the sun, you can write down what's called a gravitational field. What's a gravitational field? It's where at any point in the whole universe, you pick a point, let's say here, all right? At that point where my cursor is, this formula will give you what's called the gravity field at that point. And that gravity field is going to be directed to the sun. That's what the arrows mean. And points which are closer to the sun will have a stronger attraction to the sun. And points that are far away from the sun will still be directed, this gravity will still be directed to the sun, but the force is smaller. All right? So this is a particularly simple kind of field. It's all directed to one point, that is the center here where the mass of the sun is concentrated, and it's radial. Okay. Now, notice in this description, there is no planet. It's just a field. And this field exists everywhere throughout the universe, in every single point, in fact, at all times. Wow. After a long enough wait. So that's completely different from the object way of thinking about the situation. In the object way of thinking about the situation, I'll go back to the previous slide. We have only 2 points, sun and planet. And we have only one line, which is the distance, the radius between the planet and the sun. And that gives us a distance in the denominator. So this world, this account is extremely sparse. This doesn't say anything about what's going on in the rest of the universe, except for these 2 points. Do you understand? Okay. So this kind of way of thinking about the universe is extremely sparse. It's thin, only has points in it. And here, and this one is dense. It has a plenist or field-like account of the world. Now that's one difference. Another difference, which is even more profound, is this doesn't have any planets or any satellites in the picture yet. This equation that gives you is only a potential for movement or potential for force. In other words, this gives you what the field is, how the field is pointed, and how strong it would be, and how strong the force would be felt if you were to put a point at a given location. That's what's called potential. There's no actual force yet. This gives you a field to say again, right? Is once you pick a location, once you put a mass at a particular location here, okay, you already know which direction is going to be fielding the force for. You already know the intensity of the pull, okay, relative intensity. But in order to get an actual dynamics, you have to then put in a specific planet, a specific location. Then this formula will give you the force felt by that planet at that location. That's what's called potential. And you let it go. And you get the same result. You get it orbiting around and around. Any questions on this distinction here? This difference is, these are two differences. They're very profound, okay? The one is plenist, it's field, and the other is potential. Okay. And it has philosophical implications when people talk about the potential. Okay, I'm going to show the slides also so you can have it for the coming week. And then the third proposition is that one way to, you can use that kind of language or way of thinking about the world in terms of fields and potential, and then transpose it over to the question of affect, which is, one could be thinking, you think of affect as coming before emotions, okay? Kind of the field from which specific directed feelings, emotions or feelings of solidarity come. Okay. And that's basically all I'm trying to say here, all right? That we can think of affect in terms of this kind of field language, right? So that gives us a bit more, you're going to read a lot about, you may read a lot about affect theory because it's a big deal in social sciences and cultural studies and philosophy, contemporary philosophy. But what I'm giving you here in this third proposition is a way to make it a little bit more defined, how affect can work and how to understand affect, okay? And then number 4, we said before, and now here I'm going to tell a story. And maybe I'm just going to switch off so I can see each other's faces for a moment here. This is the fourth proposition about care. And I want to mention a thinker named Hannah Arendt. How are we on time, by the way? How much more time do we have? It's 5 o'clock, right? 5 o'clock?
Yes, 5 o'clock.
You know, if you want, I can maybe let's take a break before I go tell you a story about care. How about that? So then we can finish out nicely. Let's take another 7 minutes or so break, okay? All right, talking about care. I should care about your state of mind. Okay. to Jane Jake. All right, there we go. Okay, so the story is this. I'm going to tell several stories about care and related to nuance and continuity together. Okay, so maybe I mentioned. Did I mention? Do you remember me telling the story about the medical practice of palpation? How a doctor puts his or her hands on the body of the patient. I can tell the story again anyway, since it's now in context. So, but I'll do that, in a bit. But just to zero in on this notion of care itself, there's this German philosopher named Hannah Arendt, who was a really important thinker. Here, let me put down her name in chat. Hannah Arendt, okay. Who was in fact a student of Heidegger, and the great phenomenology professor of phenomenology, a philosopher of phenomenology. And they both were interested in, among other things, in this question of solidarity, but they had a philosophical rather than just a political take. And one of Heidegger's points was that one way that I recognize another human as an ethical subject, meaning some being that I need to have an ethical, that I have an ethical relation to, no matter what I do. Okay, there's always an ethical component to what I'm doing with another human being, is the recognition that this other human is mortal, that I'm mortal, and that being is also mortal. So that this kind of that's in a sense for Heidegger, at least, that's one way to try to discover, one way to think about the most fundamental commonality that I have with any other human being, that we are both mortal. And that was one way that he could identify this kind of recognition of the other as an ethical subject. So that's one, fine, but doesn't sound very, it sounds pretty grim, right? Of course. And Hannah Arendt, who wrote her dissertation under Heidegger, looked at the notion of caritas. This is the Christian notion. And sometimes caritas is translated into care in the English language. And later on, she thought about it and revised her views on this to take it out of the religious context, and came up with, I think, a beautiful way of thinking about care as being something that we can derive from a recognition of the other as having been born, that I have been born and you have been born. So it's you call that natality, like natal, right? Natal. So that for her was just as, and perhaps more powerful, as a fundamental basis of feeling the ethical other, the ethical status of the other, that we both have been born, we each have been born. And what was also very interesting, she added to that, was singularity, that our births are unique, that we are born unique. We are born unique and we're born uniquely. And every single birth gives us a singularity. And that singularity is also a fundamental aspect of ethics. And maybe we talked about this before. Morality, like a moral code, right, is this idea that one size fits all, that we all subject ourselves to the same set of moral rules, let's say. But ethics, the way that maybe I would think of it, in somebody like Hannah Arendt probably was thinking about it, is very, very much particular, based on a very particular this here now between the two of us, or between the group of us here now. And it would be different tomorrow. And it would be different with other people. So that's a fundamental quality of ethics. It's infinitely refined, infinitely sensitive to the contingent condition. at hand, different from morality. Okay. So Hannah Arendt and care. So that's what I started from. And if you go back and look at the chapter yourselves, you'll see that what I try to do with that is then we combine it with this other picture of field and plenum, okay, which is kind of thick and everywhere. So you can ask this question, well, maybe what if we take this discussion about care from Hannah Arendt, which is framed in terms of individual human beings, or maybe me and another animal, as these particular singular points, okay, in the space-time, in the world. And can we think about this densely, like spread out everywhere? Not just my birth, but a originality, a emergence, what's called emergence in complexity theory, the coming to be of the plenum itself, okay, of the world, everywhere, all the time. It's like the movie again, right? So this kind of richness is a lot more dense and in some ways profound than just my birth and your birth, okay, or my death and your death. It's also a way of thinking non-anthropocentrically or less anthropocentrically. Okay, this is why I make this kind of the extension, extend this notion of care beyond the social, human-based anthropocentric notions of care to this this more what some philosophers will call cosmopolitical way of thinking about care. Okay, so that's 4. Now the story I tell to go with it, just to bring it back to the human again, is I told the story, I think, about the oldest medical practice, which is palpation. You know, palpations, put your hands on the body. You know, the doctor puts his or her hands on the body of the patient, you know, and you feel like, oh, I have a stomach ache. So they put their hand around my belly or whatever, you know, to see if it's, you know, just indigestion, or could it be serious, like appendicitis, you know, or what, all right? And this, I said, is the oldest medical procedure, the oldest one, to put your hand on the body of the patient. And I said it has 2 components. 2 aspects. One aspect is to do diagnostic, to just understand what's going on. That's an analytic approach, right? Analytic purpose. The other purpose is ethical. By putting, you know, the hand on the body of the patient, the doctor conveys to the patient that I am taking you into my care, that I am now responsible for your life and for your health. So this touch is an ethical act as well as an analytic act. That's what I say. It's an interpretation, right? So touch is part of this act. It's a touch. It's an act of touching. And I don't know if you feel that, but I felt that when you go to a doctor, it used to be a doctor that actually do palpations and at least they listen to your chest with a stethoscope, you know. So there's a corporeal engagement by one body on another body. And you can feel, or I could feel, when the doctor is somebody I can trust or not. You know, have you felt this? I mean, you felt this, right? Maybe not with a doctor, but maybe with other people. You know, have you felt this sometimes, you know, maybe when you shake hands or whatever, but certainly with the doctor laying her hand on you or his hand on your body, you can feel if this doctor is nervous, is calming, is hostile, or, you know, safe, right? You can feel that. You can feel that. So basic things, you know, are the hands, what do the hands feel like? Do they feel cold, nervous, twitchy? What is it? So that's part of what I'm talking about when I talk about nuance and continuity, right? So that's kind of a story I'd like to leave with you in terms of thinking about how important it is when we talk about care to have this notion of continuity and nuance. Okay, let me pause here. Any observations or questions, comments?
I have a question. So we're talking about connections and interaction with, for example, the community and human. So as an artist, and if we're constructing like projects or raising awareness, what would be some effective way in this day to elaborate the engagement, I guess, in our community? I think that's a really big question that we are facing these days. It seems like in terms of architect, we're taking account into a lot of consideration of how to be more care, to build in those care in building environment, to eliminate like conflict with your neighborhood. But I don't know if that is encouraging the interaction between neighborhoods or the buildings, or are they or is the efficiency of how we have accessibility to certain equipment or things are actually making us more distant? Because I think that I have that idea recently because so back home we have a community group. So I see someone posting saying that please stop like watering your plants because it's dripping water. So I was thinking, was it because of when the building was first built that they were not caring about how each floor were having those gaps? So when people are some household, they love to have like plants on their balcony, but somehow having those space between each floor. So when they were watering their flowers, that's actually dripping down to another people's balcony. So I think for the design part of view, maybe that wasn't taking into account that people have different lifestyles. They thought that might be having the space that, oh, for the neighborhood to having maybe eye contact. I don't know why they have that construction, but that style of building might cause those problems. But my question would be, would that conflict in a positive way or in a negative way? Because it seems like these days people don't have patience to deal with anything. They always have a really negative point of view on, for example, like water dripping down to my balcony. I just thought that it's really annoying. But for me, I thought in a different way, like back in the days, like your neighbor would be really friendly. They even water your plants for you if you don't have time. But these days, I don't think it's possible. Like our neighborhood used to have my own house keys, and they would take care when my parents are away, they would take care of us or even invited us to their house for dinner or lunch, and we feel safe in that community. But I don't think we can do that these days. It's just like I have some questions of like, what is the what happened? Like, what should I do in this contemporary that we have a lot of issues, and just seems like the pace of people's work and living style don't have the time, and we don't have the ease in life to give us the space to take in the time to think about a lot of things and to even have the regular interaction with humans. We just don't want interaction with humans at all. That's how I feel these days.
Yeah, this is a very, very good example case to think about. I don't know if Luz, you want to comment about that. I have some comments, but I like to wait for other people to speak up to this example.
I just wrote.
Let me take a look. Let's look at what Luz has typed in so we can give her voice a rest here. There's some design strategies such as co-design and participatory design tactics that involve the community into the design projects. These strategies involve ethnographic work and social studies. And the architecture field is integrating these topics into architectural practices. And this is at the level of design.
Yes, correct. I think it is very interesting to see how the architecture field is trying to involve these topics and to join it to sorry, and to connect it with artificial intelligence strategy. So it makes me think about the importance of how we are going to use the information retrieved from co-design processes or participatory processes and to integrate that with technology. I think this is a ethic situation to consider too, because if we are just going to involve co-design practices to retrieve data and to use that data into technology, I don't know, to put that data into a robot, what are going to be the benefits that the community that developed that data are going to receive from technology or from robotics, for example? I think these are the debates that the architecture field is having at the moment, apart from all the situations related to the time that designers need to invest to really get to know the community. So how much time is needed for designers to understand the community, their identity, and their real needs? It's something that I think it's a very important conversation at the moment, but we don't have answers for this yet. It's just a matter of trying to apply the knowledge into the field and to do it as fast as possible. As always, that time is always putting some pressure into the project. So it could be delicate to connect with a community, and you need to cut the relationship because you need to move on with the project or you need to work into another project. So I think it is important to address these situations from an ethical point of view.
It's very, to carry on with both of your comments, Luz and Celia, that's why I put into chat. I mean, if this is a matter, and it seems like it is, okay, a matter of communication, we can make the question more, we can nuance the question to several questions. One is, depending on who's communicating with whom, right? Is this a communication among residents of a building, which is the example that as I first understood Celia's example. Another is Luz's example. It's the communication between, let's say, the architect and the community, or designer and client, let's say. These are different, very different kinds of communications and intentions. And in each case, though, we can ask the question, for example, the forms in which the communication is conducted. So, for example, in the case, let me just play this out a little bit, okay? In the case of Celia, your example, years before, maybe a generation ago, people might just go knock on the door, or because they've known each other for many, many years, even for a generation, they grew up together, they can sort of say, I'll go and water your plants so that, I don't overwater it, and the water doesn't come into my apartment, so it's in my interest to do it well. So it's kind of already taken care of in the case of, because the relationship set up, the one trusts the other to take care of the plants, things like that. So the communication is already embedded in a sense in the kind of a priori relationship. Another is going up and knocking, feeling comfortable about knocking on the door, say, hey, hey, you're looking at my apartment, can you take care of it? And there's no hard feelings, no hard feelings. I mean, it's an easy conversation. Or it can be like one owner is living far away, in America or a different country, and the building's back in China, who knows, okay? So it's a much more remote relationship, and the only way to communicate is through email or whatever, or tweet or something. But then you can see that this, on one hand, the technology allows this remote ownership or remote communication. At the same time, it imposes certain kind of formal structures for communicating intent or not communicating intent. So that, from my point of view, any of these technologies for communication are going to basically only represent certain aspects of the communication, like the characters, the typed letters, right? But not the tone of voice, not the expression, not the body posture, not the touch, not having a beer together or whatever, that doesn't happen. None of that happens anymore. So the kind of, that's what I call it, the tendency of the technology, informatic technology, to abstract away infinite aspects of the lived experience of being together, and only retaining certain aspects that can formally represent. That's really a fundamental problem, right? On the other side, it can do an analogous situation about what does it mean to do an ethnography and to develop this kind of organic understanding of evolution of a program of design, okay, architectural program, from original expressions of what the community says it thinks it wants, right? And then when it gets informed by history or by the expertise of the architect consultants, then it might refine its articulation, what it says it wants. Da 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 da. It goes on and on and on. So very different than saying, here are your options, you know, and you can choose. And then we will then give you a cost, et cetera, and then give you another set of options, et cetera. So these are very complicated because it may be infeasible to come up with an organic method because it's just not enough time, too expensive, or whatever. Okay, I think Lewis has more comments. It's a good example. Good example.
And I think another alternative to what we are discussing is also to design a project that allowed people to have the agency to modify them with the pass of the time, because we cannot guarantee that the design would be useful for the rest of its life. I mean, how much time a building can survive in a context. It have, I don't know, 10 years, 100 years, many more years, like we cannot visualize it. And maybe life is gonna be very different in the future. And we need to kind of provide some alterations to the building that the inhabitants or the future generations can do to facilitate those alterations so the building can unfold, like we were reading in Christopher Alexander. It could be a building that goes beyond one, only one design, be different designs according to what the people use.
This brings up another really interesting point, if I understand Lewis's comments, which is this idea that, you know, once the building is built, it's left in its ideal form from when the architect's finished, when the construction is finished. That's its ideal form, and after that is maintenance and it falls apart. But that's somebody else's problem, which is very different, maybe from a different kind of approach, thinking about like, is it the case, I've read, but I don't know if it's true, that in Japan, some temples are ritually rebuilt. They're ritually rebuilt every century or every number of generations. It's deliberately taken apart and rebuilt piece by piece. So it actually looks like the original one, but it's refreshed. So then the community thinks of it as a regenerative exercise. And that I think of as part of a more general way of thinking about design, what might be called metabolic design, where we think about examples from living systems, how, you know, when a plant or a tree sprouts and grows, it's not like it's in one perfect form and it starts to fall apart. No, it keeps maintaining itself. It changes, adapts to situations, but also maintains itself. And that's a very different way of having a complex system persist. Okay. Whole other discussion, of course. Go ahead.
I wanted to like add to that because like for one of my other classes this semester, talking about water narratives and like sea level rise, and we looked at how there's the fact that, you know, we're very utilitarian in the things that we do today, but then there's also the fact that we are heavy on permanence, right? So like you mentioned, like once you've built it, you've built it. But I think that's ironic because in a place like the United Kingdom, you have like castles and towers that have been there for like hundreds of years, but then some of them are preserved, but then there's a lot of rebuilding going on in a way that the buildings still try to maintain their historical, the history behind them. But then, in one of the books that we read, the idea was that while we're talking about sea level rise, like in places like Miami I think Mumbai in India, Lagos, Nigeria, where like more sea level rise, you're going to have millions of people displaced. It just brought to mind that we live with the sense of permanence. Like for us in today's world, the idea that you're going to have to move from one place to another because of a natural disaster or something, it's not something that we can conceive, because once we've set down roots, but like, you know, we also like studied, I think it's Venice. So I think there's like a practice in Venice where like they keep raising the buildings. It's like if you could dig, you would see that it's like building on top building, literally, right? But then we're not making those provisions for today's buildings, for the things that we make today, like the Empire State Building. Like what happens if it's gone? Is it gone? Is there, do we have a sense of impermanence? And do we build like knowing that this may not be permanent, like things may change? I don't know, like I think of some of these things and I'm like, okay, is it even feasible, like financially? Like, is this not something that if it's available, it's going to be available to a whole different class? But then I think it's even, some of the practices will even be available for like, to like even poorer people, because first off, they are not building like Burj Khalifa type buildings in the first place, right? And so it may even be easier for them to source for materials. But like, I think that this idea can be replicated in everything that we kind of do, you know, how we just want to, there's like one path and then it's just like you've gotten there and then that's the end. Nothing can, you know, shake us. So just wanted to contribute to that and, you know, say, like, I agree with Luz, like how things are being built.
So we'll think about this for next week, okay? I mean, this is a nice segue, in fact, to close out the evening today we have together and point to next week. And I'll see you all in person next week, okay? When we read and look at Christopher Alexander. I think there are two parts to that reading. One part is more his descriptions of method. And the other part, which I think is really interesting, is kind of a case study of the design and building of one house, one residence in Berkeley, the Upshur House. And it's very concrete, it's very detailed. So it's worth skimming through, but I'll show pictures from that. And then keeping in mind those questions of maintenance, of organicity, of durability. I mean, maybe a good word to think about is regenerative versus permanence. So it's one thing to build something permanent. So meaning it's not going to change its form, but we expect it to not change its form. To change its form would be a fault, versus some construction that's intended to be repaired, restored, regenerated over time by the inhabitants of the space. And something to think about there is, okay, that might work in specific local situations, but what about scale? You know, what about needing to house 8 billion people, et cetera, et cetera? You know, what happens when we need to move the cities from inland to 100 miles? Then what? Okay, what do we do? So, I think that there are ways, but we had to think about that. Okay, all right. So, fascinating discussions. Thank you all, and have a good week. I'll see you next week. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Right.